For centuries, powerful men have studied the writings of Niccolò Machiavelli. Kings studied him. Politicians studied him. Strategists studied him. But here's something interesting. Very few women were ever taught how Machiavellian tactics actually work. Which means many women encounter these strategies in relationships, workplaces, and social circles, without even realizing what they're seeing. And once you see it, you can never really unsee it. Niccolò Machiavelli was a political philosopher who lived during the Italian Renaissance in the early 1500s. His most famous book, The Prince, was not a guide to morality. It was a guide to power. Machiavelli asked a question that many philosophers avoided. How do people actually gain power and keep it? And instead of describing how people should behave, he described how people often do behave when power is involved. His observations shocked many readers at the time, because they suggested that human behavior is not always driven by fairness, kindness, or loyalty. Sometimes it's driven by something much simpler: self-interest. One of Machiavelli's most famous ideas is this: people are often motivated by advantage, fear, and opportunity. Not always loyalty, not always kindness, and not always fairness. This doesn't mean that kindness or loyalty don't exist, but Machiavelli believed that anyone who ignores the reality of human self-interest can easily become vulnerable to those who understand it. In other words, understanding human nature is a form of protection. In modern psychology, there is actually a personality trait inspired by Machiavelli's ideas. It's called Machiavellianism, and it describes people who approach relationships and social situations strategically. A Machiavellian personality is often associated with strategic thinking, emotional detachment, calculated charm, and a strong focus on winning or gaining advantage. These individuals often appear calm, confident, and socially skilled. But the way they view interactions can be very different from someone who approaches relationships with empathy or trust. For them, interactions may feel less like connection and more like a chess game. Machiavellian behavior doesn't only appear in politics or business. It can appear in everyday environments, in workplaces, in social groups, in friendships, and sometimes even in romantic relationships. Some common patterns include: someone may be extremely warm and supportive when it benefits them, but that warmth may suddenly disappear once they feel secure in their position. This can create confusion for the other person, because the kindness felt genuine. Another tactic is carefully controlling information, sharing just enough to influence people while keeping true intentions hidden. This allows the person to quietly shape situations without revealing their strategy. Charm can also be used strategically. Someone may appear attentive, supportive, and deeply interested in another person, but the goal may not be connection. It may simply be trust acquisition. Once trust is established, behavior may subtly shift. One reason Machiavellian behavior often goes unnoticed is because it rarely appears aggressive at first. In fact, it often appears as the opposite: charm, attention, admiration. People who are naturally empathetic often assume others operate with the same intentions they do. They assume kindness means kindness. Interest means interest. But Machiavelli believed that human motivations are sometimes more complicated than that, which is why awareness becomes so important. Understanding these ideas does not mean becoming manipulative yourself. It means becoming aware of patterns. Because once you understand these dynamics, you stop internalizing confusing behavior. Instead, you begin to recognize strategies. You see patterns more clearly. And that clarity changes how you respond, calmly, confidently, without being pulled into someone else's game. Carl Jung believed that psychological growth happens when unconscious patterns become conscious. Machiavelli simply observed patterns of power that already exist in human behavior. But awareness of human nature does not require cynicism. It simply requires clarity. And clarity is one of the most powerful forms of protection. The more clearly you understand human nature, the harder it becomes for manipulation to hide in plain sight. And sometimes the most powerful shift a person can make is simply learning to see clearly. If you enjoy exploring psychology, power, and self-awareness, consider subscribing, because understanding human nature may be one of the most valuable forms of knowledge we can gain.